Yo, TCK Potters, we're back. Welcome into the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Podcast. I am your host, Scott Guasco, episode 181. I am with my man, the myth, the legend, childhood buddy, Mr. Daniel Sancato, back in the place. How you feeling, brother?
I'm feeling good, man. I'm very excited for this particular podcast. I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that we are going to be the only fantasy football podcast currently running that is going to go into a discussion about Bruce Anderson. So
man,
yeah, I'm pretty excited about that, actually.
Well, without bearing the lead too much, unfortunately, we were not the only podcast last year to talk about Bruce Anderson.
Really?
Oh, that's why he'll be coming up, because people were actually bringing it up, and it burns.
Glad to hear that I'm not the only one who made that.
TCK Potters, if you're tuning back in, this is the second episode of our 2019 prediction recaps. Longtime listeners will remember Daniel and I starting the podcast 3 seasons ago all of a sudden. And we have been putting in our predictions preseason with our gamers, our busts, our breakouts, and whatnot. And last episode on Tuesday, we went through the first chunk of those. On today's podcast, we are going to get into our gamers. Again, this is coming into 2019. So this is coming out of coming into 2019. So following 2018, heading into 2019 of last year. Recapping those, of course, we're going to turn the page in the next couple of weeks with the free agency wrapping up and the NFL Combine wrapping up at the end of April. We'll turn into 2020, of course, but we are full season here on the TCK Pod. We got gamers, players that we will not draft. We talked about last year. And then I think our most fun portion of this podcast we do together, the bold predictions and crazy call recaps. We'll go into those. Without any further ado, man, let's jump right into it. Let's talk about our gamers. Now, of course, these are players that we really hung our hat on, and these are players that we went to bat for one reason or another. It was either according to ADP or not, and these are players that you and I decided that we're going to plant our flag for, try to get on our team as often as possible heading into last year. For whatever reason, some of them worked out, some of them didn't work out. I'll let you kick it right off, man. Who was your gamer heading into last year, and how did that work out for you?
Yeah, man. So my gamer for quarterback was good old Jameis Winston, who this is I'm going to go ahead and chalk this up to as a win, considering he finished as the overall QB4. This is a good example that illustrates that real football isn't always the same as fantasy football. And Jameis can flat out air it out, and he can throw for a lot of yards, and he can throw a lot of touchdowns, and he can throw some serious interceptions.
30-30 club, man. He's president.
It's not
the ambassador.
Not typically a 30-30 club you want to be a part of. I mean, what can I say? At fantasy-wise, I say still dial him up next year. I mean, that high-flying offense he's going to throw. Well, we'll see. I guess now that the
assuming he's on Tampa Bay.
Assuming he's in Tampa right now, the big discussion is: are they going to make a run at him? Are they going to let him go? We'll have to see where he ends up. But certainly if he remains in Tampa's high-flying offense, I think you can go ahead and draft him with confidence next year. The weapons are still there. The offensive scheme is still there. But if he ends up at a more conservative offense, you might have to sort of adjust your expectations. But definitely for fantasy, I'm going to go ahead and take the win on this. I'm just in general betting on Tampa Bay's offense and betting on people to produce in that offense.
100%. I'm with you. And of course, Jameis, I was a little bit gun shy on Jameis last year. I still think he's a fucking bozo, to be honest with you. Oh, yeah. But doesn't matter for fantasy football. No. Puts up the stats over 5,000 yards, of course, 30-30, 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions. First player to do that in NFL history. Again, Daniel and I are super baseball nerds, which isn't for this podcast. 30 for 30 sometimes is amazing. Football, not so much. So Jameis did work out, though, able to chuck the rock. It'll be interesting. We're not going to go into free agency too much on this podcast. Lucas and I and Tyler and Dweez have gone into it pretty heavily on other podcasts. But, Daniel, we don't talk about free agency with you. We haven't talked trade stuff. I don't want to go too far into this rabbit hole. But with Jameis specifically, if he leaves Tampa Bay, where do you see him potentially landing? And do you think he will continue to be the Jameis Winston we know in fantasy football, or is he a product of Todd Monken, originally Dirk Cutter and now Bruce Arians. If he goes to kind of a run first team or something, will he still be Jameis Winston? We haven't preempted this at all. You're kind of just, I'm calling you out off the cuff, but I'm interested what you may think about that.
I don't. I feel like I don't have a whole lot of insight on this. I mean, I think we've only seen Jameis Winston in kind of one context. I will say that he's been pretty much the same Jameis Winston for now at multiple coaches. So it remains to be seen. I mean, I like to think that that he would be at least comparable in some other sort of scheme. Whether you're talking about if he ends up in, a lot of this is going to depend on Tom Brady, to be perfectly honest.
Sure.
I think we're going to have to wait and see what happens to him. If he leaves New England, I think there's going to be chaos across all kinds of quarterback situations. But yeah, a more conservative coach might say, you know what, he's throwing too many interceptions. Let's rein him in a little bit, and maybe by letting him air it out a little less, maybe potentially improving his accuracy. I don't know. It's hard to say. I think we've got enough of a sample size with him now to sort of get a sense that he's going to be a valuable fantasy asset in a number of schemes, but it's ultimately quite uncertain at this point.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. There's obviously a lot of different options there for Jameis. We'll see what happens, but I think you're right. I think Tom Brady is going to kind of set the free agency quarterback situation on fire, and I think we'll fall into suit there.
For sure. I want to say one more thing about Jameis Winston. One thing I'll say, apparently he was, over the course of the season, he apparently couldn't see and had eye surgery. Couldn't move, basically. He had a torn meniscus and had off-season surgery to deal with that. And also had a broken thumb and couldn't grip a football. So I'm willing to potentially take the over on Jameis, potentially if he ends up in the right situation, to even improve on his numbers. At least in terms of throwing fewer picks. I agree with you. I think he's a bozo, but there's some evidence to suggest that some of his inaccuracies might have been at least partially due to what he was playing through. But that's all I'll say about that.
Sure. I get it. All right. Jameis Winston was your gamer last year. Finished up as a QB4. We'll chalk that up as a win. Good call there. Mine, not so much. I was one of the people riding the Browns and Baker Mayfield hype train. I mean, we all know how it worked out. I'm almost like kind of excited about it this year just to see if you're going to get value on all the Browns because of what happened last year. Outside of Nick Chubb, of course, he'll be a first rounder. But Baker Mayfield, it was my gamer at the quarterback position. He finished up this year as QB 19. He was getting drafted QB 6 or so, way high. Obviously, it didn't work out right off the bat. He wasn't gelling with Freddie Kitchens the way that we thought he was going to at the end of 2018 when Freddie Kitchens took over as head coach. Obviously, Odell Beckham comes in and everybody fucking loses their shit, including me. Odell's hurt all season. Turns out he's got an abdominal problem. He's got lower body issues. Again, Jarvis Landry kind of quietly one of the best receivers in the NFL and fantasy football, but not a super huge playmaker. David Njoku goes down. Kareem Hunt is out for half the season. Many, many issues against Baker Mayfield, unfortunately. I'm going to not chalk it up as it not his fault kind of a thing. However, I do think there's a better future for Baker Mayfield and the Browns as they gel with a second season with this offense moving forward. So, unfortunately, it didn't work out again. It's a bust for me. That was not a good call in the gamer. I drafted him in a couple different leagues, and it obviously backfired. But I'd almost be excited to get value on him as a late round QB this year because I do think the potential is there, and we have seen in spurts his big playability down the field. He can run a little bit if they allow him out of the pocket, and with Kevin Stefanski coming in, they're going to obviously be a run first team. So are we going to get Kirk Cousins out of Baker Mayfield? Maybe, and I don't like Kirk Cousins at all, but if I can get Kirk Cousins level work in the 13th, 14th round of my fantasy drafts and pair him up with like a Matt Stafford or something and play the matchups, I think I'd actually be okay with that.
Yeah, I agree. I'm definitely buying all the Browns next year, to be perfectly honest. I think they got one last chance with this crew to really put it together. I still think they think that they have a winning team. I'm buying Odell Beckham next year. I'm buying Baker Mayfield within reason. Obviously, you mentioned Nick Chubb. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see about Baker. I took your advice and drafted Baker in 2 leagues. Luckily, in both of those leagues, I drafted Josh Allen. The other, I also drafted Russell Wilson, so it worked out. But yeah, I mean, I think he's like another quarterback we're going to talk about a little bit later today, Jared Goff. He's got to show that he can react well under pressure, which he did not do this past season. And so that's, I think, going to be a big part of his success going forward. I know that they had talked about he had some problematic footwork. Apparently, if they can fix that, might get him on track. I don't know. There's always these off season, he's going to make all these improvement sorts of things. We'll see what happens. Ultimately, he was incredibly disappointing last year. But I agree with you. The Browns, I think, are a team for at least one more year that I'm gonna be thinking highly of.
Likewise. So it didn't work out. I know that, Lucas throws a lot of shade on the Browns, and he was last year coming into the season. And honestly, he was right. I'll definitely take the L on the Browns hype. But I do think that there's potential this year to capitalize on that with a better culture in general. And these guys starting to figure each other out. We'll see what happens. Let's move on to running backs, man. I'm gonna let you kick this one off. One of our favorite players, you and my favorite players in the league. Definitely, he's on the TCK Pod All-Star team for sure. I'll let you kick this off at the running back. Who was your gamer coming into 2019?
My gamer was James White, and this is,
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you mean James White?
James White. This is kind of a silly pick for a gamer if you think about it, like a low ceiling PPR back. But I just love the guy. I mean, he practically won me I didn't win, but was one of my top most kind of successful picks of the year before. He was my keeper going into this past season in our league of record. The bottom line is that he's a very high floor, low ceiling RB2, RB3, and he lived up to that expectation. I thought he had a real shot. We'll talk about bold predictions in a bit. I thought he had a very real shot to actually improve on his numbers from 2018. That obviously didn't happen. But nevertheless, he kept on keeping on, as James White does, catching passes. Unfortunately, the problem with New England over there is there's just too many freaking running backs. They had his target total dropped from 123 the previous season to 95 this past season. Sony Michel and Rex Burkhead kind of getting in his way. So that was kind of limited his target share and limited his upside. But I think before, in terms of his outlook coming into next season, I think, of course, as with everything in New England, we're going to have to wait and see what happens with Tom Brady. Another interesting thing is that both James White and Rex Burkhead have no guaranteed money heading into the year. So there could be a lot of moving pieces in New England. We'll just have to see how it shakes out. I still like him as the top PPR back. It's always nice to, especially if you take a chance on some young running backs with upside. It's always nice to have a James White to fall back on, who is going to catch a few passes, and get you at least maybe 10 fantasy points a game. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And let's not forget about the rookie. Well, he'll be a second-year player this year, but their rookie last year, Damian Harris, out of Alabama, who didn't even really play because he was hurt and he was the fifth one in line. But he's another guy that could definitely take work away. The good thing about James White, and we always love us some James White here on the podcast. Really, that whole thing started because of your addiction to pass-catching running backs in our league of record, which you've done for years. You've always gotten away with, and it's always been a positive strategy for you to pick up those guys late in drafts. Chris Thompson over the years, James White, Tariq Cohen, some of these guys who are able to do it. And James White in 2018 was the RB8 and led you to a championship, I believe. And then following up this year, obviously disappointing because the whole Patriots offense kind of crumbled without Gronk and trying to find their own identity and whatnot. But nonetheless, if you have James White, he can have any game. He could have 15 receptions, which is insane as a running back. So he's so specialized that I don't think there are a scenario where he gets faded out. Right. However, when Rex Burkhead is healthy, James White definitely, they double up there. James White was so effective in 2018 because Rex Burkhead was out most of that time. So definitely something to think about with James White. He finished up his RB20 this year, so we'll give you kind of a hit or miss with our boy James White, but not quite as good as 2018. I'm going to jump into Kerryon Johnson, running back number 58. Of course, he gets hurt early on once again. Another guy that I'm expecting a huge bounce back from. I said that last year though too. If he could stay healthy, I think he's going to be just fine on this Lions offense with a healthy Matt Stafford. But unfortunately, we all know that Kerryon Johnson 2 years in a row now has been disappointing. I was super high on him 2 years ago coming out of Auburn. He led the SEC in rushing. Anybody that's able to do that is very, very impressive. Most of the SEC period are NFL-ish style players and caliber talent when you're playing the likes of, Florida, Texas A&M, LSU, Alabama, South Carolina, whatnot. So very impressive running back, but he just can't stay healthy, unfortunately. So Kerryon Johnson, another bust for me with the gamers.
Yeah, I like Kerryon Johnson too. The issue that I have with him is partially, he's had an inability to stay healthy, but he's also been the Lions. Even when he's been in the game, the Lions have been kind of hesitant to truly hashtag free Kerryon. He hasn't unfortunately been making a good case for extreme usage, given that he seems to be so injury prone. Even if he comes into next season healthy, he's definitely somebody that I have a lot of reservations about, just because I'm still not entirely convinced that they see him as a true kind of bell cow, 20 plus rushes a game back. But we'll see. I'd love to be proved wrong because I think he's talented. But we'll just have to see how it goes.
It was interesting last year too, because coming into the season, Matt Patricia was open about Kerryon Johnson not being a 20 carry back, and Kerryon Johnson basically said, like, I don't really need to or want to be that guy.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I get my 15 to 18 touches, and I'll do work with those, which he's been efficient on the field. Unfortunately, just not a bell cow, and I agree with you. Unfortunately, man. I mean, Bo Scarborough, who's kind of the poor man's LeGarrette Blount, Ty Johnson, who's not amazing, but he's okay. Just another guy in the way there, I think, in Detroit. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do with the backfield there. Let's move on to wide receivers. Yours was interesting when I was kind of going back to grade. We've already talked about the Browns quite a bit. I'll let you dive into your wide receiver here, your gamer pick coming into 2019.
Yeah, Odell Beckham is kind of one of my perennial gamers. I still, to this day, I still maintain that he is in the top 3 most talented wide receivers in the league. I think he doesn't put up the numbers like a DeAndre Hopkins or a Devontae Adams or even a Julio Jones for that matter. But that's all been because he's kind of over the last bunch of seasons just hasn't been in situations that has really allowed him to thrive. Not to mention the fact that the other knock on him, like Kerryon Johnson, we were just talking about, is he does appear to be injury prone. Although he did play, I think, all 16 games this
first time. Yep.
First time ever. But he had I think, career low and I think number of catches, right? I think, and also yards, or at least since his 2017, where he fractured his ankle and missed almost the whole year. Yeah, I mean, I can't quit Odell Beckham. I still bet on the talent. Like we just talked about with the Browns, I'm expecting kind of upticks across the board in terms of their offensive prowess. I don't know. I'm probably really stubborn with him. I should probably acknowledge that he's just never going to put up numbers among the top receivers, partially due to his injury proneness. But you watch him play and you're just like, how could this guy not be the best receiver in the league? I mean, when he's healthy, he's capable of doing absolutely absurd things. So he'll be a gamer. I guarantee you he'll be at least one of my gamers going into the next year as well. I just can't stop.
The consistency of the injuries, how much does that bother you at this point?
It bothers me. I mean, it's definitely been – there's enough of a sample size now. I mean, he played all 16 games, but he was, I guess, dealing with a core muscle issue. He had surgery in the offseason. Just yet another kind of ailments that we can add to the list. So, and he's not old. I mean, he's 27, right? He's certainly not at the age where we would expect – kind of a natural decline to go along with the injuries, but it definitely is something that you have to think about. It definitely, at least in terms of fantasy, even though I still maintain that he's among the most talented receivers in the league, in terms of fantasy, he definitely gets taken down quite a few notches. But just looking at some of the fantasy stuff in terms of the early rankings, and obviously it's super early, but he's gone way down to wide receiver 2, like mid-range wide receiver 2 status or something along those lines. And I think he's higher than that still. I think I would still be targeting him as a kind of a back end wide receiver 1, maybe early wide receiver 2. Again, of course, you're not going to draft him at the same level as a Michael Thomas, as a Devontae Adams, et cetera. But I think he's potentially going to go into next season being underrated.
I dig it. Really quick, there's a lot of comparisons with just how last year shook out, the changes and whatnot. Odell or Juju heading into 2020?
Odell. I take Odell in obviously dependent on a improved play from Baker Mayfield, but I like Baker Mayfield over whatever we're going to see from Ben Roethlisberger at this point.
Fair enough. Odell Beckham finished as wide receiver 29. I am with you. I expect a nice bounce back as well in Cleveland. Also, another thing to consider always with wide receivers moving teams is it usually takes about a season for them to gel with the coaching staff, the route tree and whatnot, and the quarterback for sure. So I expect an upgrade as well. And if he can stay healthy, I'm with you, man. I think he's a top-tier talent as well. Anybody that can take a slant to the house has my attention. The problem is he just has a tough time staying on the field, and I'm just not into the diva shit. I think last year was a big, like, look at me, primetime player, big contract with the Browns, ball, wearing the watch and shit, getting penalized. Like, the money for him obviously doesn't matter. It's more the principle of him kind of knowing it's wrong, doing it anyway, going against the rules to kind of get talked about. I can't really stand that kind of stuff. So that irks me, but on the field, fantasy-wise, it's hard to go against him when he's healthy.
Word.
I'm going to jump into another one here. Devontae Adams. This one is very tricky for me. So I kind of graded these on green, yellow, and red, right? Green is we stuck the call either way. Yellow is like pretty close. Red is we bombed it. Yep. I gave a yellow tag to Devontae Adams, but this could have been a green as well. So Devontae Adams finished as the wide receiver 26 overall, but he was the wide receiver 6 in fantasy points per game. He's still my dog. I think all the things you just said about Odell Beckham, I feel similarly about Devontae Adams. As long as he's got Aaron Rodgers, I'm feeling it. There's no quality number 2 on the other side of the field taking away looks. We know that Aaron Rodgers hyper targets him, 10 targets a game at least. We saw the game he got hurt and blew out his toe for the next month or so. He had 10 receptions, the 200 yards, and he should have had 2 touchdowns that were overthrown and dropped. So it could have been a monster game. Love Devontae Adams. Didn't quite stick it last year, just the way that things worked out, but I love Devontae Adams coming in next year. I think he's another guy that I don't know about value because you have to get him in the first round or the first pick of the second round. However, I do think you're going to be able to maybe sneak him where in the last couple of years he's had to be an immediate pick. I think you might be able to fall back on him a little bit in 2020. So love me some Devontae Adams.
Yeah, the only I guess thing to be concerned about is if part of his incessant targeting by Rodgers might have something to do with the fact that he's basically the only one to target in that offense.
Right.
Yep. I think last year. So if they bring in some upgrades, it's possible. I'm actually personally not worried about that. I think he's got enough of a thing going with Aaron Rodgers, and he has not lacked for success in prior years too when he did have some other targets to throw to. So yeah, I'm all on board Devontae Adams. He's another guy that I think quite frankly I'd be happier waiting till the end of the first round, early second round to pick Devontae Adams than I would be taking Michael Thomas with like the 3rd overall pick, which is what I think is kind of happening right now. Not to say that I think negatively of Michael Thomas. Obviously what he did last year was insane, but just kind of case in point that I do think he could provide value.
I'm with you, bro. I actually like that take a lot. I think that's smart. And if you're able to steal him, you might be able to get still a top – say you took like Nick Chubb with like the 10th overall pick and you go on the flip and you're able to score Devontae Adams in the second round. I'm feeling pretty good about that aside from just a Michael Thomas and then, I don't know.
Out on all the running backs. I mean, that's a key area where you might want to So anyway, that's kind of my take.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's jump into the tight ends here. I'm going to go to mine really quick. There's not really much to say, not for yours either, unfortunately. Hunter Henry, tight end, finished tight end number 9, which sounds good if you're in the top 10 of any position, but at tight end, if you're not top 5, you're not making it happen. The reality is he just needs to stay healthy. We all know the situation. I think there's going to be a lot of mix up here. You just mentioned Tom Brady, but of course, you heard listeners heard in our free agent breakdown for the quarterbacks, Ryan Tannehill, but also Phillip Rivers on the move as well. We all know that he shipped his whole family out to the East Coast in Florida. There's talks about him replacing Jameis Winston in Tampa Bay. He could potentially be the Colts quarterback. I think there's even this outside world. He can maybe go to the Jags, which maybe doesn't make sense for a number of reasons, but that's maybe an option being in Florida. We'll see what happens there. But Hunter Henry could also be on the move as a free agent. But if he goes back to L.A., and they get my man Justin Herbert, Eugene Duck, I think that could be great for him as a check down. Otherwise, Henry's got to really be healthy, and he's got all the talent in the world, but he's not really a separator yet. He's definitely not in the tier of the top 3, Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz, maybe even Mark Andrews. We just haven't seen it on a consistent basis because of the injuries. The talent is there, but I got to see more before I'm going to buy in, I think, in 2020. There's a lot of moving parts with Hunter Henry, and I'm just not totally sold that I can buy into it. The other guy on your side is similar. I'd like to hear your thoughts on Hunter Henry and then the train wreck that was O.J. Howard.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I mean, we talked about O.J. Howard. You took him as I can't remember what exactly, one of the categories. So we already talked about him a little bit. So I'll make it quick. But Hunter Henry, yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that kind of like we were just talking about Odell. I think talent-wise, Hunter Henry can keep up with those players you just mentioned. But you're right. At this point, he's played in 41 of 64 games, regular season games, since being drafted. That's not going to cut it. And the other issue, at least going forward, is who's going to be trying to get him the ball. I believe as of right now, it's Tyrod Taylor, which is perhaps not that he's the worst, quite frankly, but he's maybe not the best, maybe not the ideal situation for Hunter Henry to succeed, although he might be able to deal with the Tyrod Taylor more than their receivers, particularly Mike Williams, would be in serious trouble, I think, if Tyrod Taylor was their starting quarterback. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I'm still going to sort of think highly of Hunter Henry going into next year. I've kind of taken a strategy of just like honestly targeting a bunch of tight ends because there's just so much like taking one of the, potentially one of the top guys, or if I miss them, then taking, a Mark Andrews and a Hunter Henry and potentially ending up with 2 really good tight ends and then getting to trade one of them or something along those lines. I do think Hunter Henry still has a lot of potential there, but yeah, obviously, as with a lot of people we talk about on this podcast, health always a looming issue. O.J. Howard, yeah. I mean, we talked all about him before. I still don't fully understand what happened to O.J. Howard this past season. I mean, we had an offense where a lot of passes were being thrown around. Obviously wide receivers were thriving. He just simply wasn't used. I mean, they just didn't use him. There's no real other explanation other than that. I still bet on talent. I think he's a huge bounce back candidate. That's pretty much all I have to say. I definitely think he's somebody you can look to. I could see him being one of the steals of the draft next year. Actually.
I agree. He was one of my breakouts on the last episode, and we did dive into him already, so we'll save it. But, yeah, definitely disappointing. I could see him getting traded. I think he could be a huge asset in, like, New England or potentially even Green Bay or something like that. It would just be another weapon for one of those offenses. Maybe even Atlanta, who's probably going to potentially shop around Austin Hooper. We'll see what happens there. So those are our gamers. My gamers were Baker Mayfield, Kerryon Johnson, Devontae Adams, Hunter Henry. Who were your gamers?
My gamers were Jameis Winston, James White, Odell Beckham, O.J. Howard.
Boom. James, OBJ, and OJ. Interesting. All right. Next category here, we had the will not draft players. There's not a lot to talk about on these ones, but we'll go with the quarterbacks real quick here. I picked Big Ben. Obviously, I was worried about the Antonio Brown leaving. We're not going to talk about the AB Express, but with Ben Roethlisberger, I was worried about not having AB. Le'Veon Bell obviously leaving. James Conner being hit or miss on his health. Ben Roethlisberger ends up getting hurt himself. He's out for the season. Clearly that one worked out to injury. On the other side, though, you had our hometown kid, Jared Goff, who ended up as QB 15. You had him as a will not draft. I'm going to count it because the hype on Jared Goff coming out of the Super Bowl, coming out of like kind of the greatest show on turf volume 2 with the Rams in 2018, 2019, the hype was real for Jared Goff. Yeah. And you and I both kind of saw through it. He wasn't terrible, QB 15, but certainly not where I think everybody saw him and where he was getting drafted. What was your reaction on Goff?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say that for him to be QB 15 in that offense is a failure, quite frankly, because I don't agree. All that matters at the end of the day is the fantasy points. So I don't, it's hard to say that this is just a big win for me, but in that fast-paced offense with above average skill player talent, I mean, they got 3 viable receivers, two really good receivers, and Brandon Cooks obviously racking up the injuries and concussions at this point, so a little less so. But the rise of Tyler Higbee, all these things have given him plenty of weapons. Like I said, fast-paced. And yet the QB 15 is all he could muster. I think that speaks to just like how lousy in many ways he was this upcoming year or this past year. I think moving forward, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think the Rams do try to upgrade their offensive line. I will say, not to bash on Goff too badly, they did have their offensive line was much less effective than when they made it to the Super Bowl the previous year. So there's that. They improve their offensive line. Maybe they teach him how to like potentially be be something other than a complete deer in the headlights when facing pressure. Maybe he picks it up a notch. I think he does have some upside as a QB2 to look into next year, given those things and given that offense, but he's got a long way to go.
And another part of that, of course, is Todd Gurley is simply just not Todd Gurley anymore. And in 2018, he was one of the best fantasy running backs we've ever seen. And then he had the low usage CJ Anderson, yada, yada, at the end of the season. Todd Gurley comes back with arthritis in the offseason. Everyone's worried about it. Turns out he played the whole year. He actually had a decent end of the season, but not having the scare of a run game like the Rams had in 2018 allowed people to bring pressure. And we've just seen – unfortunately, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is another one of these guys who's similar, where when there's legit pressure consistently, they're just not able to handle it, unfortunately. And I'm with you, with all the talent and the weapons that Jared Goff has to only be QB 15. I agree with you as somewhat of a bust there. So good call. Let's go to our running backs here. I'm going to go first on this one too, because this was definitely your biggest miss with all these, which – it just happens. But mine, my will not draft player was Devonta Freeman. Again, coming off of multiple years of MCL, PCL, ACL injuries, ankle problems. Them getting rid of Tevin Coleman, I thought actually was going to hurt them because I thought they were a great 1-2 punch. Tevin Coleman going to San Francisco, I actually thought was going to hurt Devonta Freeman. Sure enough, it did. Again, their offensive line got destroyed and their defense was destroyed, so there were negative game strips. Devonta Freeman wasn't terrible. He was RB21, but I think a lot of people thought that he was going to come back fresh and be another kind of a RB1 as he was. But he was kind of the back end of the RB2s there, and that worries me for the draft capital that he had there. So I'm going to chalk that up as a win for Devonta Freeman. Who did you have there for your running back, my man?
Yeah, so I took Derrick Henry. As my will not draft.
Which just disclaimer to not throw you totally under the bus. I was actually with you on this call preseason.
I mean, I was basing that on the fact that I think he was getting drafted too highly based on essentially like a 5-game run at the end of the previous season, one of which was like, what was that game where he ran for like 200 something yards on whatever that was?
275 and 4 on a Thursday night.
Yeah, that's right. It was on Thursday night. I remember that.
I was actually in the Bay with my brother. I remember that.
Yeah. Oh my God, that was crazy. So, and I thought that people were basically drafting him highly based on that game. And turns out he's got a few more games in him that are effective. And I actually think going into next year, I think he could do even more. I mean, he was basically non-existent in the receiving game. I think he could potentially up that. I don't see why. I mean, the Titans probably just need to take a tiny bit of, like, basically a tiny cap hit to dump Dion Lewis, who's basically useless for them at this point, and let Henry potentially develop some success in the passing game. He could be even more insane than he was last year. So yeah, I will definitely not be putting him on my will not draft list coming into next year. I will say that I still put him behind a number of the other top running backs. To me, he's still more of a back end running back one. I put him certainly obviously behind the top of McCaffrey and Saquon and Zeke and all those guys, but I had put him behind Aaron Jones as well. So I think he's probably to mid to back end RB1 going into next year, but definitely not somebody that I just flat out avoid.
I'm going to throw a few at you really quick, unscripted here. Considering the circumstances currently, Joe Mixon or Derrick Henry?
I would say Derrick Henry.
Leonard Fournette?
Derrick Henry.
And you said Aaron Jones would be ahead of him as well?
I would put Aaron Jones ahead of Derrick Henry, yeah.
Deal. Okay.
Chubb is a borderline. I go back and forth on those two.
And now, of course, we're talking PPR for the most part. We know that Derrick Henry doesn't really catch passes. Right. Doesn't mean he can't. They just don't use him that way. We saw Leonard Fournette double his production, though, this year. He didn't even score, and he was a top 10 running back. So if Derrick Henry starts catching passes,
look out.
Ugh. Okay, let's move on to our wide receivers. I had Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 17. He was my will not draft. This was all based on a run-first approach. Improved defense, which I thought was going to keep games closer, which the Seahawks pretty much played a one-score game the entire season, so that worked out. We saw glimpses of DK Metcalf's ability, and I think he's going to be a freak forever. Dude's a beast. We'll talk about him another time. Doug Baldwin leaving, though, retiring before last season, I thought was going to be a big hit on Tyler Lockett just because I thought that was not going to take away enough. I think all those things came true, but Tyler Lockett still, you look at most of his stat lines, it's like, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 93 yards, and a touchdown. Right. It's insane. Russell Wilson is absolutely incredible, deadly accurate, finds Tyler Lockett. Last year, go and look it up. Tyler Lockett had one of the sickest catches I've ever seen anywhere, but in the back corner of the end zone, a la Santonio Holmes in the Super Bowl with the Steelers years ago. So obviously he's got the skills, and I think I've been undercutting him the last couple of years with his overall talent. I'm going to chalk it as like a because he was wide receiver 17, but I don't think I'm going to be doubting Tyler Lockett moving forward. And overall, run first or not, Russell Wilson is just able to get it done.
Yeah, that offense continues to puzzle me in terms of what I think about drafting people in it, because it's just like, the Brian Schottenheimer's scheme is just so low volume in terms of passing, but it's just Russell.
He's just efficient as shit, though.
His passes. What are you he doesn't throw picks, and he completes all his passes. So it's like he can potentially sustain both Lockett and DK Metcalf, and potentially even a serviceable tight end as well. So it's, you can never really bet against anybody in that offense, but there's always going to be some risk. Lockett did have quite an all or nothing thing going on this year. He made major ups and downs, games where he did nothing, and then games where he'd go berserk.
But a lot of alls. And another thing, I think the most impressive thing about Russell Wilson and the Seahawks offense is, you're right, it's low volume pass game wise, but Russell Wilson is just, you're right, he's smart. He doesn't make mistakes, right, and he keeps drives alive. He's running less and less in his career than he used to, but he is so good at just like a 3rd and 6, yep, look, run for 6.5 yards, pick up a first down, slides, stays healthy, no big deal, another chunk of yards, another 4 downs. That's a big deal, and that's incredible leadership and maturity from Russell Wilson keeping it alive. So Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 17. Man.
Yeah.
So you pick will not draft. You pick Antonio Brown. We all know what happened with Antonio Brown. Let's put that aside. Let's put yourself in a mind frame of coming into last year. Yeah. Antonio Brown is A, still sane, B, still on an NFL roster, and C, coming off of 15 touchdowns.
Yep.
Leading the NFL. He's still Antonio Brown as we know him. He's just a free agent. Goes to Oakland, looks great. Seems stoked. Let's take us to that mindset, because that's when you made this prediction. You still said you were not going to draft Antonio Brown.
That's a little bit. That's giving me a little too much credit, because a lot of this stuff was at least started. He hadn't robbed anybody yet, but he definitely was he was starting to show some signs. I mean, he was starting to. But first, there was the helmet fiasco, which I think was starting up around the time that we were talking about these predictions. So there were some warning signs in the air. That being said, yeah, I mean, it hadn't gone completely haywire yet. Part of it was that I was worried about his battles with Raiders management and his threatening to not play. Anytime that stuff happens, I always get a little bit nervous. I mean, I was nervous even about Ezekiel Elliott last year. I took him in our dynasty league, but anybody who's threatening to not play, I tend to be very conservative when it comes to these sorts of things in fantasy football. But yeah, also just the other thing is like, I just didn't. I don't know. I didn't quite know what to make of him in Oakland. I wasn't sure how he was going to sort of fit in over there. Not the biggest fan of just in general kind of the offensive schemes. Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of had a feeling that he would not thrive in the same way that he did in Pittsburgh. Derek Carr, obviously very hit or miss, has not really been able to do like a ton of sustaining, really, really high-end receiving play over the course of his time there. So yeah, there were some performance issues that made me nervous. Also, the previous year, he did show some signs of decline in that last year with Pittsburgh. He got in the end zone a bunch, but that's not the type of thing that necessarily is predictive of year-to-year success. And so he did start to show some signs that maybe he was a little less effective. So all those things kind of together made me very, very concerned about his situation heading into last year.
And my brother, who of course you know very well, he plays in a his buddy's league of record they've had for a decade or so, and he couldn't make the draft. He works more than full time, and he wasn't able to make the draft. He texted me last minute and goes, "Hey man, can you jump on, help me out, whatever?" I'm like, "Sure, I got you." I said, "Hey, are there any players you definitely want or definitely do not want on your team? Otherwise, I'll do my best and we'll wing it." He said, "Cool, I trust you. Do not draft Antonio Brown." And again, this is kind of like during all that shit, but like he's still AB. If he kept his shit together, he's still AB. And my brother was basically like, "Do not draft Antonio Brown." I was like, "Okay." And I didn't, and it worked out. But I've had Antonio Brown the last like 3 years on our dynasty or our league of record, help me go undefeated and win the league and all this shit. It's hard to like not draft Antonio Brown after his legacy, but obviously that's all out the window, unfortunately, at this point. But just an interesting standpoint I bring all this up. We probably just wasted 15 minutes talking about Antonio Brown for no reason. I bring it up, though, just in that in one season, with the brutality of what the NFL is, what fame is, what all these guys are actually going through as human beings, things can change in a heartbeat. So dynasty leagues are extra exciting when you have these kind of things coming up because it's not just this season, it's long term.
Totally.
Let's jump into our tight ends really quick, and then we'll have some fun. Tight end, I picked Zach Ertz. I just figured he finished tight end 2 in most settings. He's the man. He's still the man. As long as he's healthy, he'll be just fine. I overthought it. However, we do have a bold prediction coming up in a little bit. I'm going to dive into this deeper, but my whole thing was Dallas Goedert was going to become the new Zach Ertz. Mm-hmm. I wasn't right, but I think I was just a year early. And I'm going to like pause right there, and I'm going to get into it in our bold predictions. But basically, I'm going to call it a miss because Zach Ertz was tight end 2, and he was just fine. But I could see my prediction from last year coming to fruition this year. You picked Eric Ebron. How did that go?
That went well for me, bad for Eric Ebron. Yeah, I mean, this was I'll claim some credit for this because I think we made these picks before Andrew Luck quit.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
100%. Yeah, and again, with Antonio Brown, we talked about league leading 15 touchdowns. I say this every time with Eric Ebron, this is after 13 receiving touchdowns for a tight end, which is insane, and he also ran one in. So he was second in the league with Devontae Adams with 14 touchdowns, and you saw the fade. Now, I think all analysts predicted regression, but you straight up were like, I'm not going to draft him, period.
Well, I wasn't going to draft. Yeah, I mean, there was no world in which I was going to draft him given where he was going. I mean, theoretically, yeah, if he had fallen toward the end of a draft, maybe I would have potentially thought about it. But to me, he was nothing more than like a back-end tight end too. And yeah, I mean, it's just there was no way he was going to sustain that type of touchdown play. Jack Doyle still there, still going to take actually quite a bit more of the target share.
I think he's going to be sick this year, by the way.
He could be sick if he stays healthy. Eric Ebron's gone, by the way, in Indianapolis, almost in doubt. So
New England? Eesh.
what's
Anyway.
up?
New England, maybe? I think it would fit in just fine.
Eric Ebron. I actually was really high on him the previous year. Like the year that he took off, I kind of was like picking him as a potential sleeper. And then after all his touchdowns, everyone started overrating the hell out of him, and then I kind of went completely in the other direction. This upcoming year, we'll have to see where he ends up, because it definitely won't be Indianapolis. But yeah, the other issue with Eric Ebron is that drops have always been a bit of a problem. So that tends to hurt his chances of earning the trust of a quarterback. But we've shown that he can catch a touchdown. He's big-bodied. He can line up all over the place. So he's definitely not valueless, and he could potentially be an interesting fantasy asset in this upcoming year. But it's going to depend on where he ends up.
100%. I totally agree. And that good call there. Let's recap the will not drafts, and we'll jump into our bold predictions and crazy calls. My will not draft players were Big Ben, Devonta Freeman, Tyler Lockett, and Zach Ertz.
Jared Goff, Derrick Henry, Antonio Brown, Eric Ebron.
I will say, man, outside of Derrick Henry, obviously that blew up in your face, but everybody else was really solid for you.
I think
Derrick
Henry handedly screws up all the rest of them.
Sure, but I think that was one of your better calls. And here's the deal, man. Having gamers and will not draft players, I think, is one of the most important categories. Everybody's got busts and breakouts and bounce backs and shit, but that's all kind of like, we'll see. Having a gamer, I think, is big because we're trying to give value and advice. So we want to hit on those, obviously. And then having will not draft players is even more important because if you say don't draft Derrick Henry and people take our advice and they don't draft Derrick Henry and he becomes who he is, obviously it makes it look like shit. On the other side, we kind of see the Jared Goff situation. We see the Antonio Brown, obviously not to that extent, but the Eric Ebron, building street cred there. So good call. We are going to jump into our bold predictions and our crazy calls and have some fun here. This is going to be cool. Before we get in, I wanted to just thank everybody for listening in this long. If you like what you're hearing, please drop a subscribe here on the YouTube channel and make sure you give a rate and review on the podcast wherever you're listening. Please follow us on the social medias. You can follow us anywhere, TCK Pod or the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Podcast. We appreciate the support there. The bold predictions and crazy calls is something we've done 2 years in a row. And I went through and I actually went back on our predictions and I dug through the research and I actually gave like the answer of what actually happened. Interestingly, some of them we actually nailed and some of them we were way off. And some of them were a lot closer than they should have been. So let's jump right into it, man. Bold predictions. You and I each had one bold prediction. I'm going to read off what it was, and then you can kind of retaliate on what actually happened here. So let's jump into yours really quick. So your first bold prediction was that Will Fuller stays healthy the whole year and scores 10 touchdowns. What actually happened?
He did not, and he didn't. Did not stay healthy the whole year. Played 11 games, scored 3 touchdowns. Remains one of the ultimate boom bust per people you could possibly draft in fantasy football. I don't think I'll be into it next year, to be perfectly honest. I still think the talent's there, but these are all, all these injuries that he has, this isn't like he got hit hard and broke a bone. These are all soft tissue injuries.
The worst.
That are the worst, and they've added up now. And I, for what it's worth, he said he's vowed to investigate these soft tissue problems this offseason. I honestly don't know what that means. He scares the crap out of me going into next year. I still think he's super talented. I do not trust him to stay healthy. And for that reason, I still think that it's worthwhile to potentially draft Kenny Stills if he sticks around in Houston.
He played well.
Will Fuller, needless to say, did not stay healthy, did not score 10 touchdowns.
Will Fuller, unfortunately, played 14 games his rookie year, 10, 7, and 11 since then. So still has not completed a full rack of games. Bold prediction for me, Mike Williams outscores Keenan Allen in overall fantasy points. Again, this is coming into last year. So please remember that we're talking about last year, coming into last year. These are not 2020 bold predictions. Just want to be clear about that. My bold prediction, Mike Williams outscores Keenan Allen in total fantasy points. That did not happen either. Keenan Allen, wide receiver 8, 238.8 fantasy points in PPR. Mike Williams, wide receiver 39, 155.5, one less game for Mike Williams. Obviously, it just didn't happen. I think a lot of that had to do with Phillip Rivers not being able to throw the ball downfield anymore. Again, like Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, which we'll get into in just a little bit, I think I was maybe a year early on this prediction. I do think before too long, Mike Williams overtakes Keenan Allen overall in fantasy, but as long as they're going to throw him 4-yard slants all game and he gets 12 catches every week, and Mike Williams is, pretty reliant on 3 40-yard targets a game, the percentages are just with Keenan Allen. So maybe a little early again, but that was a whiff for me as well.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, their quarterback situation could drive Mike Williams' value down even further, but we'll see. I like Will Fuller. I still bet on the talent of Mike Williams, and he doesn't come with quite the same injury scares. But it's going to depend on the situation.
Totally. What was your next bold prediction?
My next bold prediction was that Darrell Henderson was going to be this year's Alvin Kamara and was going to win your league's fantasy playoffs. He probably lost you the fantasy playoffs if you took him in a single digit round, which some people did, banking on Todd Gurley missing time, which he did not. He played in almost every game, 15 of 16 games. We'll see what happens. I mean, I still think he potentially has breakout potential, but that's going to be completely tied to Todd Gurley, and whether or not he's going to stay healthy, whether or not he's still going to be the main guy over there. We'll see what happens. I still think he's an interesting handcuff to be looking into in the late rounds of next year's draft, but we haven't seen a whole lot of anything to get overly excited about in this situation, unlike predicted.
I totally agree, and I still think, all that being said, I think Darrell Henderson is a great dynasty scoop. If people were just kind of like, I spent a 6th-round pick on him, he didn't do shit, I'm pissed, drop him, go scoop him up, or pick him up in a couple-player trade, you might be able to get him for free. Mm-hmm. On the running back tip, my next bold prediction was that Matt Breida leads the San Francisco running backs in fantasy points. This is with Tevin Coleman and Jerick McKinnon, and for the record, I almost chopped up a clip just to make sure that this was noticed. We literally recorded this podcast last year with the bold predictions the day before Jerick McKinnon went out again. So at that particular time, Jerick McKinnon and Tevin Coleman were ahead of Matt Breida, and I still predicted that he would be the lead back for the 49ers. Now, he was not. He was third behind Raheem Mostert, my man. RB32 and Tevin Coleman RB38. Breida was RB45. So let's think about that really quick. 3 running backs for the 49ers were wide receiver 3s and 4s. Now, that's not awesome for one guy, but that just shows what the potential is for that offense. If 2 or 3 of those guys get hurt and one dude runs it like Raheem Mostert was through the playoffs, that's some scary shit, dude. I'm all about that. However, we have acknowledged that Kyle Shanahan wants to have multiple backs. He's even said it again at the Combine, like he likes 3-4 running backs. I kind of like my man Jeff Wilson for free. We'll see what happens next year. But anyway, Matt Breida, not quite, but I'm excited about obviously the 49er run game moving forward. Yep. Let's move into our next bold prediction. Take it away.
Yeah, so my prediction was that Melvin Gordon will not play a snap for the Chargers this past season. So this is kind of a 2-parter here. 1, that Melvin Gordon wasn't going to play at all. And then 2, Justin Jackson was going to, not Austin Eckler, was going to be the most fantasy relevant running back on that team. Needless to say, none of those things happened. Melvin Gordon eventually played, although he was highly ineffective. And when Melvin Gordon wasn't playing, Eckler was technically the main guy. Although I will say this looked like for a second it had a chance of coming through, because actually Justin Jackson was pretty ridiculous.
Dude, he's awesome. He really is.
He was averaging like 8 yards per carry for the first 3 games. And then injured his calf that basically completely ruined his season. But I still like Justin Jackson. Part of the rationale for this was A, Justin Jackson's really good. B, Austin Eckler had thrived more as kind of a change of pace back historically than when working as a lead guy. So I thought that Justin Jackson might be able to emerge and kind of take the Melvin Gordon role. But injuries and also just the fact that, Austin Eckler, as it turns out, is a pretty damn decent running back as well. So yeah, it didn't quite happen. But I think both of those running backs in LA are going to, meaning of course Justin Jackson and Austin Eckler, are going to be worth drafting. I think Austin Eckler is getting a little bit too much love, quite frankly, from what I've been seeing. I think he's being drafted in like the early second round or something, and that seems a little excessive to me. But Justin Jackson, kind of like what I was just talking about with Darrell Henderson, but maybe even more so, Justin Jackson is a very worthwhile cuff to take later in the draft.
Austin Eckler finished running back number 4, and Melvin Gordon, even though he only played 11 games, running back 23. So assuming Melvin Gordon moves on, Austin Eckler should be the lead dog. I like Justin Jackson as well, though. Chargers will be just fine without Melvin Gordon, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to jump into my next one. Devin Singletary eventually takes over the Bills' starting running back position and is an RB2 from that point on. This one came to fruition. Now he was behind Shady McCoy for a minute. He's behind Frank Gore, and he was emerging. I think the talent was already there. People already knew that he had it. It was just a matter of if he was going to get the opportunity. He did. He became the running back 18 from week 9 through 16, and he was a nice value pick in 2020. I'm excited for Devin Singletary moving forward. I think he'll be just fine. So this was one of the rare ones that I was able to stick with the bold predictions and crazy calls. So Devin Singletary eventually takes over for the Bills running back position and becomes an RB2 or better moving forward. He was RB18 from week 9 through the rest of the season. Let's jump into your bold prediction. And this wasn't terribly ridiculous at the time, but this is a sore spot for a lot of fantasy players.
Yeah, this is really frustrating. Yeah, we talked about so my prediction was that David Johnson was going to be the number 1 overall player in fantasy. And I was thinking along the lines of PPR format, but not that matters at this point because he wasn't the number 1 fantasy player in any format ever in any
on his team.
On his team, that's right. We already talked about David Johnson a little bit. It's hard to really understand what kind of has gone on with him. I mean, he just simply is not the same player that he once was. I don't know if it was just what he was earlier in his career was fluky, or if injury or if being hurt kind of threw him off, or if it's just he's not just unable to thrive in Arizona's current scheme, or what. I don't know exactly what's going on or what his problem is, but definitely not the number 1 overall player in fantasy. Not somebody who I'm overly excited about going into next year either.
No, I mean, I think the Cardinals are going to get rid of him. They'll lose a shit ton of money no matter what, unless they can possibly trade him. I'm not sure who would trade for him. It just doesn't make sense. But unfortunately, yeah, David Johnson, man, I went into this whole I was with you, bro. I had the big 4 that everybody had, and then I had David Johnson, then Joe Mixon. And I was super duper confident that David Johnson would return to a top 5 and Joe Mixon would be number 6. And obviously that just didn't happen. So unfortunately, no cigar there. My next bold prediction was Zach Ertz finishes tight end number 4 or lower, and Dallas Goedert finishes tight end number 6 or higher. Obviously, this didn't work out. Ertz was the tight end number 2. Dallas Goedert was the tight end 10. So actually, as ridiculous as I thought that this bold prediction was at the time, I wasn't terribly far off. If we're talking about 2 tight ends on the same team, now, of course, we haven't seen that type of production outside of Gronk and Aaron Hernandez in 2011 when they were both tight end 1s, and we got it now with Ertz and Goddard. Again, I think that I was pretty close, but not straight on. I might have the same exact bold prediction this year. Again, with the value, Zach Ertz is still going to go in like the 3rd round in drafts. Dallas Goedert's probably going to go in the 8 to 10 earliest as a backup tight end on his team. I might take Dallas Goedert all day because if Zach Ertz does get hurt, he becomes number 1. And in the red zone, Dallas Goedert's bigger, faster, stronger than Zach Ertz is, and he's younger. And I think he's going to start taking over that role there. So I think I was just a year early again with the Eagles tight ends.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not. I agree with you about Goddard. I just think these two can coexist, and Ertz will still be good. That's my kind of take on it. I just think what Ertz is capable of over there. We know that he's, as long as he's on the field, he's going to be a really key target of Carson Wentz. So I'm not ready to go ahead and kind of demote Zach Ertz yet, but I do agree with you that they're both probably worth potentially taking a crack at this upcoming year. One of the very few situations where two tight ends are going to have a chance to be that valuable.
And I think just having that value of like, are you going to take a third round tight end
Right.
who might get surpassed? I don't know about surpassed talent wise, but just might lose value, or take a chance on the late round tight end and go for a stud running back or receiver at that point. You know what I mean?
Yep, I agree.
Cool. Let's get into the last bold prediction. We'll jump over to the other side for crazy calls.
Yep, my last bold prediction was that James White would catch 100 passes. He did not. He caught, 72? And kind of career lows across the board. We already talked about James White. Still has his role, still going to catch a ton of passes, but just too many players over there cutting into his workload.
100%. He had half as many touchdowns as 6 than he did in 2018 with 12. Obviously, that's going to bolster you as a running back, getting in the end zone. We love James White. We talk about him all the time on the podcast. And again, your prediction at the time was not wrong as far like crazy necessarily. I think it was just you saw it continually going up. The Patriots did not have their usual flow. And for the first time in a very long time, they were uneasy, I think, with the run game and the pass game. And we just saw, again, how much Rex Burkhead actually gets used in that offense, and that hurts James White.
Yep, no doubt.
My last bold prediction was that Patrick Mahomes does not end the year as the QB1 overall. Of course, this is after a ridiculous 50 touchdowns, 5,000 yards from Mahomes. One of the most historic fantasy seasons and NFL seasons we've ever seen in 2018. I was right here. He was the QB8. He was QB3 in fantasy points per game. Of course, he got injured for a few weeks there. This is no knock on Mahomes. I just thought he might fall a little bit no matter what. And sure enough, with the explosion of Lamar Jackson and, frankly, Dak Prescott for that matter as well, Mahomes fell down the tier a little bit. Is Mahomes going to be top 3 in 2020? Most likely. Am I going to be spending a second, third-round pick on him? Probably not. Love me some Mahomes, but I think I'll ask you right now. Do you think Lamar Jackson repeats as the number 1 quarterback?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think his success is incredibly sustainable and arguably could even go up. I don't know. We'll see. I think Lamar Jackson just put together one of the most unbelievable seasons I think we've ever seen, actually. In terms of especially in terms of real football. Mm-hmm. There's a value. There's a stat that I was kind of looking at on Pro Football Reference, which is a football stats website, kind of tries to take into account a player's overall value, kind of contribution to the team. And his score on that was like the second highest in the history of football or something like that last year, behind only, I think, LaDainian Tomlinson's 2006, if I remember correctly. Which
is the highest non-quarterback fantasy season of all time.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I absolutely am buying Lamar Jackson 100 times over next year for sure.
Got it. Those are the bold predictions. We nailed a couple, missed on a few. Let's get into the other side, the crazy calls. So the difference between a crazy call and a bold prediction, the way that Daniel and I see it, is a bold prediction is kind of crazy, kind of like, that's unlikely to happen, but it's possible. Crazy calls are like, that's kind of ridiculous. If that happens, shit either hit the fan or somebody exploded in their opportunity. We had a couple of crazy calls. Let's jump right into it. Daniel, we've buried the lead long enough. I'm going to let you kick this right off. What was your first crazy call heading into 2019?
Oh, good stuff. My first crazy call, I decided to start it off with the craziest of them all, was that Bruce Anderson.
Who?
Bruce Anderson.
Bruce Anderson, okay.
In quotes if you want. Bruce Anderson leads the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in touchdowns. Now, I know what you're thinking, that Daniel is out of his mind, and that's true when it comes to this particular pick. But my rationale was that Peyton Barber is not very good. Up to that point, Ronald Jones at least hadn't been very good. And this is an offense that likes to throw the ball a ton, and Bruce Anderson might have some value as a running back that can catch passes. So I thought he had a chance to potentially make the team and outperform those two guys. I had to literally look all over Google just to figure out where the hell Bruce Anderson even is. I went on Fox Sports NFL page because I went Bruce Anderson transactions to figure out where he was, and it took me to a dead page. So that's how non-exhaustive. Oops, this page appears to be missing. So that's how bad this pick ended up being. Apparently, he's been sitting on the Colts practice squad. That's where Bruce Anderson has been.
Yet to have an NFL touch, unfortunately.
He does not have an NFL touch, I'm sorry to say. So typically speaking, one has to be on a team to get fantasy points, and that did not happen. So swing and a miss, to say the least.
Okay, so quick question right away. Will you be targeting Bruce Anderson for your 2020 Dynasty roster?
Oh, yeah, totally. Sleeper, man. Sleeper, back-end sleeper.
Here's a good thing. He's not on anybody else's radar, so he's probably free.
That's true. You could definitely get him with some value.
Yikes. He could be your 29th roster spot there, just in case.
Yeah, he's gonna come up big when Marlon Mack, all their other like 6 running backs get hurt, and then he's gonna be the man.
For Dynasty, would you rather have Bruce Anderson or Rob Gronkowski?
Rob Gronkowski. I'd rather have. I think I'd rather have. I'd rather have like J.J. Stokes than Bruce Anderson.
J.J. Stokes, man, ringing my old 49er ears. I love that. All right, I'll jump into my first crazy call. It was that David Montgomery ends the year as a top 10 running back. Not as terribly off the radar as Bruce Anderson. However, David Montgomery did finish as a wide receiver 3 technically, but wide receiver 25 overall. This was really disappointing. I mean, not being top 10 is, again, it was a crazy call. I didn't necessarily expect that, but I could see the upside. This was just disappointing as the Bears offense in general. We talked about Anthony Miller a lot in our previous episode with a bunch of different breakouts and bounce backs and things like that. But the overall Bears offense, I think everybody was kind of buying into, including both of us to a certain extent. And you call it a reach. I believe I picked David Montgomery in the 2nd round maybe of our Dynasty League. And people were blowing me up on the chat right away like, bro, geez. And I was like, well, again, Dynasty, he's a rookie. Like, we'll see what happens. I'm still kind of excited about the pick longevity-wise, but not a good first year. I just think they need to catch their win, see what happens with Tariq Cohen, Mitch Trubisky, see if they make a quarterback change, if they are able to have more of a receiver presence to bring people off of the line. I still believe in David Montgomery. I don't think he's as bad as what Jordan Howard turned out to be because I think he can dual threat. But as long as Tariq Cohen's there, he's just not going to be a pass catcher, and I thought he was going to be coming out of Iowa State. So, unfortunately, David Montgomery was a fall as well. Why don't you jump into your next crazy call, and let's go back to Ertz and Goddard.
Yeah, so this was, I guess, in some sense, ended up being the least pathetic of my crazy calls because it kind of, at least in concept, happened. It's just I had a unrealistically high expectation. But basically, my crazy call was that Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert combined for 2,000 yards and 16 touchdowns. They did not. They combined for 1,523 yards and 11 touchdowns. Again, I think conceptually speaking, this was true. It's just I obviously way overshot the mark in terms of the numbers. But they proved this year that they can coexist and both put up really effective fantasy numbers.
Absolutely, man. And again, maybe we're just a year early. We'll see what happens. Yeah, I'm going to jump into my next one. This one's kind of a long one, but hear me out. 4 of the 5 top second-year quarterbacks from 2018 draft class finished as a QB1. So I'm talking about Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Sam Darnold. Unfortunately, I'm not talking about Josh Rosen, who I think he's still in the league, right? Dolphins, maybe. But it's Fitzmagic time in Miami for sure. So unfortunately, Josh Rosen's going to have to wait. This did not happen. Of course, we all know Lamar Jackson, QB1 by a lot. Josh Allen, your boy, QB6, very impressive. Baker Mayfield, though, QB19. And Sam Darnold could not overcome mono, missed a month, and was out QB27. Josh Rosen, though, for people keeping score at home, QB49 on the season. Unfortunately, this was not it. I still have a lot of promise for all these quarterbacks moving forward. Josh Rosen, I think, just needs another fresh start. Josh Rosen, unfortunately, screams Alex Smith for me, which is just super duper sad, but We'll see what happens. Anyway, Lamar Jackson, beastin'. Allen, just fine. I still believe Baker and Darnold are going to be just fine moving forward, but this was kind of a miss on my crazy call there for quarterbacks.
Just a tick.
More quarterback crazy calls. Why don't you jump into your third one, rather?
Yeah, less effective. My pick here was that, or my call here was that Jared Goff was going to be benched and outperformed by Blake Bortles. So this was just me being goofy, quite frankly. This had no real validity, but it was more just the fact that as I talked about already, I was very not interested in Jared Goff coming into this year. I thought he had a lot of problems, and I don't know. For some reason, I've always had this weird soft spot for Blake Bortles, even though he's been unbelievably awful in most of his NFL career. But yeah, not much to be said about this one. Didn't happen. Blake Bortles isn't very good. Jared Goff, for the foreseeable future, is the guy over there, and that's not going to change.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, my other crazy call was that Will Grier, rookie out of West Virginia, was going to take over Cam Newton's position and be a QB2 or better from that point on. Of course, that did not happen somehow. Kyle Allen, who I didn't even know was in the league until he took over, only played Will Grier only played week 16 and then a snap in week 17. Kyle Allen got the chance to back up Cam Newton. He threw 4 touchdowns in his first game, didn't do much the next handful of weeks. Cam Newton up in the air. They've committed to Cam Newton in Carolina. I don't think that's a good idea. I also don't think that they're telling the truth. I think that Cam Newton has played his last game as a Panther. Personally, Kyle Allen didn't show a lot. Will Grier didn't either, but I think Will Grier is a better quarterback. In general, we'll see what happens. Anyway, I thought Will Grier was going to make it happen. He didn't. That was also a bust. Jump into your fourth crazy call. This one didn't really have legs right off the bat.
No, not particularly. So my crazy call here was that both Zay Jones and John Brown both finish as top 24 wide receivers. I got in there with John Brown, who had a nice season and has actually proved that, at least for the most part, has actually been able to stay on the field, which dogs him during his entire time with Arizona, and was a pretty solid target of Josh Allen's. I like him a lot going forward. I think he's immensely talented and what is now a pretty effective offense. Zay Jones, not so much. Ended up on the Raiders. Played behind Tyrell Williams, Hunter Renfrow, and Darren Waller in terms of targets. Never really did anything. Just simply not happening. I've always been keen on Zay Jones' talent, but for whatever reason, just simply not happening for him in the NFL. It's not clear that he's going to make the Raiders roster this upcoming year. And meanwhile, in Buffalo, Cole Beasley has emerged as a very viable wide receiver too. Not necessarily a high upside, but a solid possession receiver who seems to function quite well in that offense. So yeah, needless to say, this didn't quite work out as I planned with Zay Jones. I'll take whatever I can get with John Brown though.
Absolutely. Zay Jones finished wide receiver 115, not going to get it done. John Brown, wide receiver 15, a good call there. My next crazy call was that all 3 Packers receivers end the year as wide receiver 2s or better. So that was Davante Adams, Geronimo Allison, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling. That did not happen. We've already talked about Davante Adams, but he was wide receiver 26. Geronimo Allison, wide receiver 88, and MVS was wide receiver 83. They simply just couldn't get on the same page. They were dealing with injuries, yada, yada. The Packers have to draft one of these incredible rookie wide receivers. I think they might get a couple of them potentially and let these other guys walk because Davante Adams doesn't need help for fantasy purposes, but he could use help for NFL purposes. And unfortunately, I think there's immense talent, but we just haven't been able to see it unraveled for any consistency with Geronimo Allison or MVS there for the Packers. Let's jump into our last crazy calls. I'll let you kick this one off, of course, as well. And again, another one that might be just a year early.
Yeah, so my pick here was that this was in some sense the one I was like most excited about.
I think the most reasonable, to be honest.
Most reasonable, yeah, I think so. So this was that Calvin Ridley was going to outscore Julio Jones in terms of fantasy points. Obviously, it didn't happen. Julio finished as wide receiver 4. Ridley finished as wide receiver 22. And I made this pick on the basis of touchdowns, quite frankly, because Calvin Ridley has shown through his first couple of years in the NFL that he's a touchdown monster. And he's got 17 touchdowns in 29 games thus far in his career. It's not unreasonable to say that this is like among the best in terms of at least fantasy points and fantasy performance, among the best start of any like player ever, like immediately out of college. like I'm still in love with Calvin Ridley. I could easily make this prediction again. Julio Jones obviously still going to show no signs of slowing down. Still taking the majority of the targets. Has shown that he can catch at least a few tight end or a few touchdowns this past year. Although Ridley still caught, I think, one more. Yeah, we'll see. I'm really high on Calvin Ridley going into this upcoming year. But Julio's fortunately, because I think Julio Jones is amazing and I love watching him play. But I don't think he's going away, at least not just yet.
I totally agree with you, and it'll be interesting as we look at 2020's bowl predictions and crazy calls, which we won't be doing until July earliest. But it'll be interesting to see how many of these do repeat. I think the Dallas Goedert and the Zach Ertz ones happen again, and then the Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. I get it, man. I get it. And again, say Calvin Ridley's he's about a 4th, 5th round pick right now. Would you rather go Julio Jones in the top of the 2nd round or Calvin Ridley in the 4th or 5th?
Ridley. I would go with Ridley, to be honest. Yeah, I would. I mean, I love Julio Jones. Nothing against him, but I think, basically, to me at least, what I've been doing in the mocks that I've done so far is really targeting top tier running backs in those first 2, and then trying to get some value receivers in
tons of value, dude.
The likes of Stephon Diggs, Calvin Ridley, some other players that are going in those rounds, and yeah, I'm all in on Ridley.
DJ Chark, Courtland Sutton.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Courtland Sutton, another guy I'm really in love with. I still think, to some extent, highly of the top 2 Rams receivers, Robert Woods and
Cooper Kupp.
Cooper Kupp, Jesus Christ. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of like the high value receivers that you can get after those top guys that I think are worth taking a look at.
I totally agree. I wouldn't mind having Julio Jones on my fantasy team, though.
I don't think anybody minds having it.
All right, last one, man. This is kind of a somber note, but my last crazy call was that Josh Gordon ends the year as a wide receiver 1. Of course, we all know what happened again for like the 4th time in his career. However, this was a fresh start with the Seahawks, with the Patriots. Fuck, dude. We've gone in depth in the last couple of years on just, I don't know. We don't need to get into our personal lives, but Daniel and I have sympathy, to say the least, for Josh Gordon and his struggles in life with just substance abuse and addictions and whatnot. And we say it every single time, man. I mean, his talent is unquestionable. If he had his shit together and he was able to kick this, I think he would be a Julio Jones type receiver. I really do. But it just obviously hasn't happened, unfortunately, and he hasn't been able to get rid of this demon. He is most likely done. They can't reinstate it for like a 9th time. I mean, I just can't imagine that will happen.
No, I think he's almost certainly done, unfortunately. Sadly, we've had this thing in the last couple episodes. We've been ending on sad notes. Last time it was Jordan Reed. This time it's even sadder with Josh Gordon.
It just happens that where it lands, man. But
yeah, I know, it's too bad. He's done. There's no way they're gonna give him another shot. He's had a lot of chances, unfortunately. So yeah, we can close the door on his briefly successful and ultimately very unfortunate NFL career.
Yeah. So we do wish Josh Gordon the best. Yo, man, it's a long one tonight, but we always have fun doing these recap episodes. I appreciate you jumping on once again. We went through our gamers and our will not draft players. We went through 5 bowl predictions each, 5 crazy calls each as well. Daniel, it's been a blast, man. Always appreciate having you on, of course. Hopefully now with this new transition, getting out of school and catching a huge job, which, you can share with folks if you want to. If not, no worries. But having this new transition, maybe you could be on the podcast more often. And it's always good to chop it up with you, man. So thanks again for taking some time tonight.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. So I'm working at Facebook now, which is amazing. By the way, I'm loving it down there. So yeah,
like the Facebook headquarters, like legit.
The mothership, if you will. It's a hell of a place. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, I hope to contribute to the podcast a lot more, especially as we start ramping up for the 2020 season. I definitely won't be on every time or every week, but you'll start to hear from me more often, for better or for worse for your fantasy teams. But yeah, looking forward to reconnecting and getting excited for the next season, man. I'm stoked.
Awesome, brother. We got some mock drafts coming up. We're definitely going to want your participation in. Of course, you will be you'll be a team captain on the listener league. We've got a league of record too, so y'all be hearing plenty of Daniel moving forward. If you're still listening, thank you so much for taking the time. Again, please hit the subscribe button here on the YouTube channel. Give us a rate and review on the podcast wherever you're listening, a like and a follow on social medias. Give us a comment as well. Let us know if our bold predictions were as crazy as they sounded, considering the state of mind again coming into last year. What maybe some of your bold predictions and crazy calls are coming into 2020. And we will catch you next time on the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Podcast. For Daniel Stancato, I'm Sky Guasco, and we are out of here.